We're all searching for guidance. Whether it's in a role model of ours or through a medium like YouTube, we find advice everywhere these days. Everyone is an expert in something. But in a world where influencers are rife and some only out for the money and fame, this can become a real issue, especially considering that we have a tendency to shape our beliefs and decisions and judgments of people we perceive as experts. But before we dive into this thing that we call the authority bias, subscribe to this channel so we can continue to feed you nuggets of gold on brain and behavior. So as the name implies, the authority bias is when we attribute greater credibility, competence, or expertise to a person based on their perceived authority, status, or reputation. From this, we accept or believe information from these so-called authoritative figures without critically evaluating their accuracy or validity. In this, I use this term so-called or perceived because at times these authority figures may not actually be actual experts. The concept was initially explored by psychologist Stanley Milgram in the 1960s during his famous shock experiments. In the experiment, Milgram discovered that individuals were willing to administer potentially harmful electric shocks to others based solely on the instructions of an authority figure, even if it conflicted with their own moral compass and even if that authority figure wasn't truly an authority. Despite the participants knowing and hearing that those receiving the shocks were expressing real pain, participants continued to administer shots simply because an authority figure of some sort commanded them to do so. Studies like this were further replicated, with one key case being the Hoffling Hospital experiment, conducted by Charles K. Hoffling in 1966. In the study, he had participant nurses receive a phone call from unknown doctors to administer potentially harmful doses of medication to said patients. With the assumption that they were speaking to a doctor and perceived authority, a high percentage of nurses obeyed these hospital orders despite clear violations of the hospital protocols. The Stanford prison experiment is another famous study conducted by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, which investigated this bias further. In the study, they simulated a prison environment. Participants were then assigned the roles of guards and prisoners. Those that assumed the guard role exhibited more abusive behavior towards their fellow participants, despite not really having any real authority, simply just out of the fact that they assumed more of an authoritative position. While studies like this are a bit exaggerated and cruel, we can see that the authority bias is and does exist in our everyday lives. When it comes to our health, we often rely heavily on the advice of medical professionals. And what ends up happening is when sometimes people do go to these doctors, just because they got some advice from an authority figure, they don't choose to seek out any second opinions. This authority bias can then lead us to accept treatments or medication without fully understanding the potential risks or exploring alternative options. It's the same in marketing, where celebrity endorsements tend to have considerable sway over our purchasing behavior. We see a famous celebrity or influencer promoting a given product, and despite that person not really having any scientific background in what they're promoting or perhaps not even using, we as a viewer or consumer have a greater inclination to opt in simply because an authority figure is endorsing it. The authority bias is rooted in a combination of social, evolutionary, and cultural factors. For one, our societal structure at large heavily emphasizes hierarchical power dynamics. From a young age, we are taught to respect and obey figures of authority such as parents, teachers, and leaders. This hierarchical framework creates an inherent belief that individuals in an authoritative position possess more power and knowledge and credibility. Secondly, the authority bias can be traced back to our evolutionary instincts. Throughout human history, early humans lived in groups where clear hierarchies were essential for survival, so as we talked about earlier. Obedience to authority figures helped maintain order, allocate resources, and protect the group from external threats. So those who followed authority had a greater chance of survival and passing on their genes. So what has actually ended up happening is this evolutionary heritage within us has actually ingrained us to obey and defer to authority figures as a means of ensuring survival and belonging. And then finally, there's that aspect of cognitive efficiency. Individuals can accept information without critically evaluating it by relying on authority instead, just because it is a lot easier for our brains and more efficient for our minds to do so. We don't really need to put so much thought into something. So instead, we just pass that trust to an authority. And then just to add on to that, Throughout childhood, we're always socialized to respect and defer to these authority figures. So it results in us just kind of being willing to accept opinions and information without question for people that we perceive as authority. It's just kind of like the socially accepted thing to do. Then there are other biases that play a part, such as the halo effect, which is where the tendency for positive impressions of a person, company, or country, or brand, or product can influence our overall judgments. While trusting in authority is not the issue, blindly trusting anybody that we perceive as having authority is worth knowing when making judgments and decisions. Once again, blindly accepting misinformation without verifying the legitimacy or accuracy of a given claim or a given information is pretty detrimental. To really understand whether a product is worth buying, we should do our own research and investigation. Moreover, with authority bias, this perpetuates power imbalances and inequality by allowing those in authority to actually manipulate or control information. If we give too much power to these authority figures, even if they don't really have any given expertise, then we succumb to any recommendations like sheep. Recognizing and addressing the authority bias is crucial for fostering independent critical thinking. For one, we can learn to assess evidence, evaluate information, and consider alternative viewpoints independently. In this world where anyone can essentially become an influencer, it's important to be able to clear out the noise and think critically. We should try to seek multiple sources of information, gather perspectives from a variety of sources and experts to reduce reliance on a single authority. Trusting in an authority isn't bad, but you should always question things and examine whether a person has the experience, the knowledge, the expertise, and the credibility to be actually trusted. Once again, as I shall repeat, none of this is saying that trusting an authority is bad. We all need authorities in our lives, and as I said at the start of the video, we all need somewhere or someone to guide us. And there is a reason why expertise and experience is valued. It's just important to note that this bias does exist and is tricking our brain sometimes when we do make our decisions. Not everything is as is. Overcoming tricks in our brains like the authority bias requires conscious effort and a constant need for critical thinking. By embracing all of this, we can navigate the complexities of false authorities and actually foster greater intellectual growth and independence on ourselves. If you enjoyed this video or want to know more about cognitive biases, there is a playlist on the right, or watch the video on the left to learn more about the halo effect, which I talked about earlier in this video. Make sure to subscribe to this channel to help us grow, and so we can continue to stimulate your brain and help many others mind the golden mind.